Tonight we're going to study about a topic that I don't think we mention it, I think, a lot. I don't think we talk about it a lot. I think it gets brought up in sermons. I don't think we hear a lot of sermons solely on this topic. It's the topic of hell. Probably not a topic that we like to think a lot about, but I think it's important, and I think maybe there's some things that we need to talk about, especially just for the fact of when we read the Bible. Hell. What do you think about when you hear the word hell? Well, I suppose there's a lot of things that people think about when they hear the word hell. Some people think of the devil, some people think of Satan, some people think of fire, some people think of torment, some people think of darkness, some people think of, other things. Not a place we like to think about. The Bible doesn't talk a lot about hell. In fact, how many times do you think the Bible does talk about hell? Maybe that's something maybe you could pause the video and maybe throw out an answer if you're with somebody, and maybe y'all could debate back and forth. How many times do you think the Bible talks about hell? Well, I'm here to tell you it varies. It varies on the translation of the Bible that you use. Now, here's what I mean by that. If you read out of the King James Version, hell is mentioned in the King James Version 54 times. Okay? If you're reading out of the New King James Version, hell is mentioned 32 times. If you're reading out of the ESV, hell is mentioned 14 times. So between the ESV and the King James Version, hell is mentioned, 40 more times in the King James Version than the ESV? What does that mean? That means some translations you're going to read about hell more than other. Well, are you actually going to be reading about hell? That's some questions we might wonder. Well, one question we really wonder is, why is that? Why is it that if you pick up the King James Version, you will see the word hell 54 times, but if you read the ESV, you're going to see it 14 times? Okay. Maybe we need to stop that thought for a second and think about this. The Bible was written in what languages? Well, you have the New Testament, and it is written in Greek, and then you have the Old Testament, and it's written in what language, you remember? Hebrew. It's written in Hebrew with some Aramaic sprinkled in, but it's primarily written in Hebrew. Okay, in Hebrew and Greek, there are four words that some translators have translated as hell. There's one term in the Old Testament, and there's 3 terms in the New Testament. We're going to start with that first term in the Old Testament. That first term is Sheol. What do we know about Sheol? It's probably a term that you've heard of before. If you have your Bibles, let's go over to Job chapter 14. Job chapter 14. Now, Job chapter 14 is in the first cycle of speeches in the book of Job. I think most people know the book of Job has 3 cycles of speeches between the friends and Job. Eliphaz speaks first, and then Job responds, and then Bildad speaks and Job responds, and then Zophar speaks and Job responds. We're in the section of Zophar's has just got done speaking and Job is about to speak. Job chapter 14, we'll look in verse 13. Here's what Job says. Oh, that you would hide me in Sheol, that you would conceal me until your wrath be past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me. If a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my service I would wait till my renewal should come. You would call and I would answer. You would long for the work of your hands. For then you would number my steps. You would not keep watch over my sin. My transgression would be sealed up in a bag, and you would cover over my iniquity. In Job chapter 14 and verse 13, Job desires that God would send him to Sheol. Why does Job want to go to Sheol? Well, he believes that God has inflicted him with the pain that he is experiencing, and if he could go to Sheol, that suffering would be gone. In fact, you see that in the book of Job. Job wants to be a laborer in Sheol. Why does he want to be a laborer in Sheol? Because if he's a laborer in Sheol, God will not want to pay attention to him and he won't suffer anymore. Job wants to go to Sheol. Now, if you read in the King James Version of the Bible, when Sheol is mentioned in the Old Testament, sometimes the King James Version translates that word as hell. Sheol is not hell. At least it's not hell in the sense that we think about hell, hell being the place of the wicked. Sheol is not the place of the wicked. The Hebrews thought that Sheol was a physical place that was beneath the earth, and it is where everybody went when they died. That's what they thought about Sheol. Now you might be wondering, well, okay, hold on just a second. If that's the place that everybody goes when they die, why when I read in the King James Bible when Sheol is mentioned in the Old Testament, why is it sometimes translated as hell if it's not actually hell? Well, that's right. That's a good question. Because sometimes when Sheol is mentioned in the Old Testament, it is translated as hell. Sometimes it's translated as the pit, and sometimes it's translated as the grave. So were the King James translators wrong? No, they weren't. Well, the question is, if Sheol is not hell, why is it sometimes translated as hell? How can they be right in doing that? Well, when the King James Version was translated, hell meant two different things. People had two different ideas when they thought of hell. One idea they had was hell is the place of the wicked, the same idea that we have. The other idea was hell is the place that all people go when they die. That's Sheol. That's why they translate Sheol. They know Sheol is the place that people go when they die, and they also knew that hell had another idea attached to it, another meaning, and that was where all people go when they die. That's why sometimes it's translated as hell. Sheol is equivalent to the Greek word Hades. Hades is mentioned in the New Testament, and that is also where people go, all people go, when they die. In fact, you might remember Matthew chapter 16. Let me get my Bible there. Matthew chapter 16. You remember what's going on. Jesus asks some of his disciples, he says, who do men say that I am? And some of them say, well, some say you're John the Baptist, and some say you're Elijah, and some say you're Jeremiah, and others say you're one of the prophets. And then he asks them, well, who do you say that I am? And then Peter says, well, you are the Christ, you're the Son of the living God. And then Jesus says what? He says, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. And then he says, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. The gates of hell. Now, I just read out of the English Standard Version, and it says the gates of hell. He's not talking about the place for the wicked. The word here is Hades. The gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Hades is equivalent, remember, to the Old Testament idea of Sheol. It's where all people go when they die. Okay, we've talked about Sheol. We've talked about Hades. Now let's talk about another word that's used in the New Testament. Another word that's used, we find it's used only once in the entire New Testament, and that's in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, and the word here is used as a verb. I think, I might have to go check on that, but I think it's tartarosas, I think is how it's used here in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. It's a derivative of the noun tartaros. What is that? Well, let's read 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. Okay. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. Into hell. Into, the idea here is tartarus. Now remember, this word is used one time in the entire New Testament. Now the question is, what's it referring to? Does it capture the idea of hell, the idea that we think of when we hear the word hell, that is the place for the wicked when they die? Maybe. Maybe this captures that idea. Maybe it's actually referring to hell. Some people have said, well, it's actually the bad part of Hades. Okay, and here's what some people have said. You know, you have Hades. Hades is the realm of the dead. It's where all people go when they die. But there's a bad part of Hades reserved for bad people, wicked people, and there's a good part of Hades reserved for the righteous people. And they'll stay there until God comes back and judges the world, and then the righteous will go to heaven and the wicked will go to hell. They get this idea from Luke chapter 16. Luke chapter 16. Let's go there for a minute. The rich man and Lazarus, you remember that story. Well, what's it say about the rich man? In verse 22, the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw of Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame. He goes to Hades, but in Hades he's being tormented. Okay. Some people have said that's tartarus. Tartarus is the bad part of Hades. All right, the final word in the New Testament used for hell is Gehenna, hell. That is the place that you and I think about when we think about the word hell, the place for the wicked. It's used 12 times in the New Testament. Not much. 12 times. Certainly better than one time, but 12 times still not much. 11 times. 11 times it is used by Jesus. Now, the word hell that we think about is used 12 times in the New Testament and 11 times it's used by Jesus. What does that tell us about Jesus? You know, some people have this idea about Jesus, about God, that God would want them to be happy. And because God wants them to be happy, that means they can live their life however they want to live their life. And God surely wouldn't punish them. God's a loving God, and He's merciful and He's gracious. And because of that, so we can do what we want, essentially. And in the end, it'll be all right because He'll say, I wanted you to be happy. It's okay. Don't worry about what you did. It's true. Jesus was loving. It's true Jesus was gracious. It's true Jesus was merciful when he lived. It's true that Jesus is loving now, and it's true that Jesus is merciful now, and it's true that Jesus is gracious now. But Jesus came to preach a message. And in the message of Jesus, he said, look, in essence, you need to live your life right. You need to live your life for me, because there's a place for people that don't. Matthew chapter 5, verse 22, it might give us some insight into Gehenna. Matthew 5:22, we'll start in verse 21. Sermon on the Mount, remember, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. Gehenna. The hell of fire. James chapter 3, verse 6. I know that maybe you're excited to go back to James. Maybe that makes you sick to think about it since we were in it so long. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and is set on fire by hell, by Gehenna. Okay. Hell is used 12 times in the New Testament. It's used 11 times by Jesus himself. What do we know about hell? Not much. Okay, if we read, we know it's a place that there's going to be fire, and when we read too, we know that it's a place of darkness. It's darkness and there's fire. Now maybe that causes you to scratch your head for a second. It does me. How can there be a place of darkness and there be a place of fire? Well, maybe hell literally has dark fire, maybe. Or probably it's metaphorical. You know, it's like the idea in Revelation that there's streets of gold. Is that true? Is there really streets of gold in heaven, or is that metaphorical? What is it? Well, I don't know. Maybe hell is dark and maybe it has fire in it actually. Maybe that's how it. I don't want to go to find out. That's for sure. Certainly not a place that we want to go. What else do we know about it? Well, not much, but we could start looking at the idea of punishment in the New Testament. Maybe that would give us a better picture. Maybe Matthew 8:12. Matthew 8:12. We'll start in verse 10. When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, truly, I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at a table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Hell is a place of darkness with weeping and gnashing of teeth. Not a good place, not a place we want to go. You know the worst part about hell. It's captured in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 9. Here's what it says. They will suffer the punishment of eternal destruction away from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might. Hell is a place separated from God. If you like light, hell would not be a place that you want to go. If you like grace, hell is a place that you would not want to go because there is no grace. If you like mercy, hell is not a place you would want to go because there is no mercy. If you like love, hell's not a place you would want to go because there's no love. Hell is bad. Hell is bad because it's away from God. I remember I was in 11th grade or 12th grade, and I was reading a book by C.S. Lewis, The Great Divorce. And I remember something he said about hell in The Great Divorce. It's always stuck with me, and I think it's very, I think it's applicable here. He said, in the end, humans are going to say to God, "Thy will be done." Or in the end, God is going to say to humans, "Thy will be done." What did C.S. Lewis mean by that? C.S. Lewis said, people are either going to be obedient to God, or God is going to send people where they want to go. If a person is going to spend eternity in hell forever, it's going to be because they chose it. God loves us enough to let us choose. That's it. That's all the time that we have for our study tonight. I sure have enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see everybody on Sunday. As always, I hope you're doing well, and God bless.